Thank you. Ladies and gents, thank you so much. Happy New Year's Day. Happy New Year's Day, ladies and gents. Happy New Year's Day. We're going to pick up where we left off. I'm so thankful for everyone coming through, supporting the show, for news and gatherings. Still slowly but surely, once again, it is the 1st of the 1st, 2021. 1st of the 1st, 2021. Before we start, I want to bring to task Boris Johnson, how humble Boris Johnson's been with passing Brexit. How stupid some of us have been. Not taking situations seriously. COVID-19, you've got to protect yourself. You've got to protect your others, your family, haven't you? You've got to be in your own support bubble. People going around partying, thinking that, they're doing a good thing by their family. Not supporting their own family, not supporting their own health before supporting others. So think first, think safety. I say it again, time and time again. I'm even put myself in that bubble. I've had to, because I've got to be the adult. I've got to be the appropriate adult at 37 when it's up. They're supposed to be wiser people than me, but not always the case in this scenario, unfortunately. Anyway, I'm a student at university. Although I bring a great opportunities when it comes to politics. I've got great aspirations within politics. I'm not blowing my own trumpet because it's still early days. I'm still a student. I'm still learning. Every day. I'm learning new stuff. Crimmigration is one of them. Crimmigration. What could you picture with crimmigration? Well, before I started legal immigration coming over our borders. It's criminology, isn't it? It's criminology, so it's crimmigration. Crimmigration. It's a word. Use it. Paraphrase it. I taught you something new. Every day you come through here, every day you're learning something new. Anyway, we're picking up where we left off, page 135. We got the conclusion of what we had yesterday, tragedy of the commons. Altered social sciences to the external social costs and benefits of private action, and a possibility that negative externalities could ease serious environmental degradation. This challenged the widespread belief traceable to Smith. A self-motivated individual action would generally have positive social effects. However, individual action would generally have positive social effects. However, rather than changing the philosophical outlook away from private profit motivated individualism, some economists have reinterpreted the commons problem as one of which profit motivated action is because private property rights have not been adequately assigned. This chapter has investigated how commons problems and those relating to public goods can be traced to external effects of individual action. Because externalities are outcomes that are fully priced, economists have suggested ways in which problems can be overcome by internalizing the effects, incorporating them into the price system. This leads the economists to argue that, contrary to the pessimism expressed by the discoverers, the commons problem can be solved by comparatively simple adjustment without fundamentally departing from a system of decentralized, unregulated private activity. This free market view is strengthened if externalities are generally small, and if economic progress makes the problems of exhaustibility and non-exhaustibility easier to tackle. Yet worsening environmental problems have led others to conclude that externalities are now pervasive and require a fundamental departure from current ways of ordering individual behaviour. Environmental externalities are pervasive because property rights to prominent classes of natural capital are difficult to enforce, and worse, challenging to define. The wind blows, river flow, fish swim, deer flee, birds and insects fly, and even earthworms are known. Gupta and Lish. I mean, let's talk about common resources. You know, you're going to work using everyone's using common resource at work, which, you know, by rights, the absolute sovereignty of the land owned every common resource. We've got the fishery rights all governed by the law. How about, you know, all these critics in the social media, the absolute imbeciles in the social media, putting all the politicians down, saying, you know, being very sceptic towards them, you know. Probably some of these listeners listening in. What if the government turned around and said they're giving you the right to go fishing to catch the fisheries? They're giving fishmongers a job to sell fisheries, but no one's actually thankful for their job position. You know, they've been allowed to go and catch and sell the natural resources. There's a job for everyone, isn't there? Even the politician, people go, oh, it's taxpayers' money, but really, you're just working on a shop floor. You're earning taxpayers' money as well. So what is the difference? So all you listeners listening in, if you're, you know, you're working for the Royal Mail, your assistant or your delivery driver, you feel like you work to the bone. That was your decision. That was your job. That's what you wanted to do. So enjoy it. Rather than sit there and be a critic and criticise others with no perspective or plan ahead. This is what I'm reading out to people, so we acknowledge the differentials within humanity. Hard in 1968, in framing the problem, argued that it has no technical solution. Even modifying the price signals to encapsulate the external costs of giving people more information about their carbon footprint and the other global effects of local actions may not change people's behaviour to avert a tragedy within the current rules of the game. This chapter has shown some economists can point to suggestions for technical solutions through the assignment of property rights or consensual management of common resources, but as problems become wider and ultimately global, such solutions may be harder to design and maintain. Indigenous, lovely word, isn't it? Indigenous lands and territories, mapping the commons. Chapter 5. The introduction on page 143. As the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples held on 22 and 23 September 2014 in New York City. Indigenous peoples' land rights were an essential concern. This annual conference is hosted by the General Assembly of the United Nations, where the member states make decisions on important global issues. At this conference, rights and resources. A global coalition of non-governmental organisations engaged in forest and land policy reform in Africa, Asia and Latin America presented a report. This report argued, in the face of rampant tropical deforestation, the land rights of indigenous peoples are essential for the effective protection of many of the world's tropical forests. The report highlighted that the recognition of the indigenous peoples' land rights can also benefit the mitigation of climate change. And the important global environmental issue is also pointed to the difficulties faced by the world's indigenous peoples, whose land is increasingly claimed for industrial development. You know, we talk about environmental friendly, now they get industrial development, making more pollution to the land. The kind of development that is beneficial for some but damaging for others. Although the term indigenous peoples is notoriously difficult to define according to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Indigenous peoples have the following characteristics. Self-identification as indigenous peoples at the individual level and accepted by the community and their member. Historical continuity for the pre-colonial and pre-settler societies. A strong link to territories and surrounding natural resources. Distinct social, economic or political system. Distinct language, culture and beliefs. Forming non-dominant groups of society. Resolving to maintain and reproduce their ancestral environments and systems as distinctive peoples and communities. Many indigenous lands and territories are owned, managed and used by communities. In most cases, the communities have a sense of belonging to these places and therefore such lands are seen and maintained as commons. This view that is often challenged by the claims from industries and corporations who want to make the land private. Page 144. Indigenous land and territory mapping the commons. Creating enclosures and making the land exploitable so that it can be exploited for profit. The process of enclosing and commoning occur across the globe. In this chapter, you will explore the antagonistic process, the actors and interests behind them, and the impact on those living in such areas. This chapter refers specifically to indigenous land and territories, a majority of which are commons. However, not all commons are indigenous lands and are found in many other places, for example. Public parks or national parks are also commons. As you read about in Chapter 1, global commons, of course, have a much broader meaning and include, for example, the Earth's atmosphere, deep oceans, or even cyberspace. Common resources are governed in an economy that is increasingly based on private ownership. Being able to decide what happens to our land is a matter of human rights. However, where laws are not equipped to deal with informal ownership, external powers can start to exploit the land. Have declared many lands as protected for the greater common good, such as you read about in Chapter 2, can conflict with the needs and wishes of indigenous communities. This chapter looks at the indigenous people's struggle in contesting and enclosure, examines different approaches to managing these resources and the extent of which greater inclusion of local communities in their management is desirable or possible. Any land that they're trying to build on, they want to build some new industrialisation in buildings. On, I don't know, say a listed, they will knock down some old listed buildings. They need to build some industrialisation so they can get globalisation flowing, business exposure. It's all politics. They can't just go and knock down a derelict building, can they? They can't knock derelict buildings down. So it comes into a political debate, which people do not understand. It's important to know your rights, your human rights, international Bill of Rights. It's important to know about derelict buildings, what you can and can't produce. Politics is very, very informal for our lives. You're doing a job, you're a builder. You know nothing about what goes beyond your job. You're an electrician. All you know is how to, wire up a few wires, put a light bulb up. All done. Tap on the back. I'm not a dummy to say, sorry, if anyone's an electrician here, I didn't mean that, if you are an electrician, I didn't mean that irrational, because you're probably more intelligent than me, people listening. It could well be. It could be a bricklayer. It's just top of my mind if I have an electrician for whatever reason. I don't know, I'm just saying for instance. But, as a youth, going to building, you know nothing but your job. You don't see what goes on in, you say you work for a big building firm, you've got your site managers. They're the ones that are doing the politics within the building. You've got a derelict building, they want to Build on the side of a hospital, for instance. They've got to have meetings with the council. They've got to make, it's like a political debate within the community. Can they build the extra, I don't know, baby unit on the side of the hospital? Is it going to take up, space? Is it going to take down derelict buildings opposing to the building? There's a lot of things, rules and regulations you need to look into. Anyway, representation of territories and resources are powerful tools in shaping how the use of land is intervened and understood. The most common and powerful representations are maps, and this chapter will let the material introduced in Book 1, Chapter 4, in thinking critically about maps and processes and map making to better understand the power embedded in them. One of the tools used to resit enclosure is something called counter mapping, which is also used as a tool for establishing the rights of indigenous peoples over their lands. Page 145. Section 1. Counter mapping indigenous lands looks at a case study of Dom Grier, the Kondef and indigenous peoples group in eastern India, to explore the process of enclosing and commoning in relation to indigenous lands and territories. The case study focused on the plight of these people who sought to save their sacred mountain and came into confrontation with a powerful multinational corporation. A long battle between two ended with the indigenous group's victory. In section 2, governing the commons focuses on the community conserved areas. These are areas that should give greater management power to indigenous peoples, but complex governance structures can work against them. These issues are framed using the work of Noble Levite Eleanor Ostrom, to whom you are introduced in Chapter 4. Page 146, ladies and gentlemen. Counter map indigenous lands. Indigenous peoples' traditional use of common land and Western notions of private property often come into conflict with each other. Demarcation of private property is motivated by the desire to have excludable rights over the use and extraction of resources. This requires defined boundaries around private-owned land. The making of boundaries for declaring land private goes hand in hand with map making because maps can help to legitimise boundaries. History is replete with examples of such map making to claim territories. Roger Kane and Elizabeth Pgaes, in their 1992 book of the cadastral map in the service of the state, traced the development and application of rural property mapping in Europe. From the Renaissance through to the 19th century, cadastral maps are records of property ownerships. Kane and Pgaes argue that these maps acted as tools for the consolidation and extension of land-based national power and played an important role in the rise of modern Europe. They demonstrate how cartography became a political instrument to serve national interests. Such map-making was further exported to the European colonies throughout the 19th and 20th century. In order to lay claims over available land resources during this process, the European colonists made detailed maps of these lands and the resources they contained, subsequently claiming a stake over them. The map of European settlements in West Africa in the early 19th century, in Figures 5.1, shows how the land resources in West Africa were divided between the colony powers of England, Holland and Denmark. Forests were one of the most important resources mapped by the early colonists because timber was an important commodity and one that was necessary for the colonial expansion. Timber was used for shipbuilding, and the importance to timber, a construction material, well into the post-colonial period, when the newly independent states set out to develop their infrastructure. This infrastructure, however, came at a severe cost to indigenous peoples who lived in a deepened and forest for their livelihood. Nancy Peluso, 1995, described the local response to the Indonesian government's disregard for customary forest rights and indiscriminate timber exploitation. The response involved counter mapping in order to delineate land that the indigenous peoples traditionally managed. Peluso argued that the counter mapping assists indigenous peoples to claim their stake over land and resources by showing not only what is on a map, but what is not on it. Peluso, 1995. Counter mapping can be used to change the official version of a map. For example, the official map may omit small settlements, or it may alter categories of land or forest management that contradict indigenous peoples' modes of land use. Counter mapping can be used to challenge their omissions or misrepresentations, propose an alternative version that is different from the official map. Such counter maps are often prepared by indigenous groups in collaboration with researchers and non-governmental organisations. In an attempt to better represent indigenous knowledge related to resource management, these maps seem to give an added advantage to communities to encourage them to stand up for their rights to their land, its resources, and the right to manage those resources. Figure 5.2 shows a counter map prepared through the collaboration between the Soliga people in the South India and the Soka Trust for the Research in Ecology and the Environment, India. The collaborative effort produced a counter map showing 6 different types of sites that are sacred to the Soliga people. These sites were not recognised in the official version of the map, which simply showed an empty jungle. Page 149. My glands hurting. My glands. Page 149. Anyway, preserved by the state or authority as a protected area for tigers and other wildlife. The Soliga counter map helped the group to assert its rights over the land following the enact of the Indian government's recognition of the Forest Rights Act, FRA, in 2006. I mean, I haven't read that page and I was already talk about derelict buildings, wildlife. There's all sorts of reasons and rights. Political. It's a political agreement, isn't it? It's a political. Has to pass the rights of building, the building rights rules and regulations. Hiccups. So I haven't eaten yet. It's like 6:30, but I'm going to do an hour reading anyway. 1.1. Confronting claims over a sacred mountain. So what happens when indigenous people stand up against the forces of capitalist modernisation and fight a battle with powerful corporations, offering to buy up their ancestral land to exploit mineral resources underneath it? In Dogra, the Kundi, an indigenous group of people in eastern India, seeking to claim rights over their sacred mountain and ancestral land, confronted a Vedanta, a powerful multinational mining corporation, 2002. This led to a local protests, which subsequently prompted the Indian government to declare that mining activities could only take place with consent from the indigenous group. I mean, over the years, from growing up, I put myself a lot of pain, done a lot of manual work, done a lot of building, and you grow wisdom from doing building, especially groundwork especially. You don't think how much common resources come through the ground. All kinds of common resources come through the ground. You've got water, you've got oil, you've got methane as well. Methane gas in the ground. I've done underpinning I've done piling, so you're drilling like 30, 20, 30 metres in the ground. We was in Romford one day. We was drilling a hole inside a building. The guy that owned the house, I think he may have well hit a gold mine. But he was drilling down, pulled the augers out of a 12-metre hole, 12-metre bore hole. We bored a hole to put. If it had no footing, so we was building a room inside the house. He was building a. So it's got a structure. The house has got some support because it had no footings. So we built a raft. So yeah, we're drilling down. Oil squirted out everywhere, flooded the living room. I mean, when you pilot inside a house, there is no living room apart from walls. All the floors out the bottom living room because you're drilling holes into the dirt inside the building. So we're drilling down, pulling the augers out. Oil was pouring out of everywhere. So that person that owned that building, it's probably like a derelict building. And the oil, maybe a gold mine. If that guy that owned that building, owned that land, he might have some sort of rights over the oil. I'm not quite sure. I don't know how to look into, property rights. Do you own what's underneath the ground, or do you own just the property? Do you own what's coming out of the ground? That's one thing I never knew. But you talk about common resource. Common resource come from anywhere, and it's quite when you use your noggin, you think back of your life spent, things you've done in your past. You think I've been a big part of this industry in a lot of sense, and I'm so glad I'm doing this course because it's something I should have done at a young age. I was always quite I was an intelligent chap, but I was also very active, very very active. Very, very, very active. Kundane Kumar, 2013, a researcher at the University of Toronto, Canada, was involved in the case and described the Conforia, Condi and the Vedanta mining cooperation between 2002 and 2013. Page 150. Box 5.1. The Nyamgira struggle. You can chop off your heads, but you can't take the Nyangri, Ladu Sukaka, Dongria leader. Nyangri is topped by a rich bauxite deposit, the extraction of which was sought by the London-based Vedanta Resource plc, a mining and metals multinational corporation in 2002-2003. Vedanta, with the support of the government of Odisha, started to build a 1.5 million tonne alumina refinery in Lanjagar, and applied for permission to mine bauxite from the mountaintop. The proposed refinery would lead to full displacement of 118 families. Hello, Mum? Hello, Dad?
You alright, mate?
Yeah, boss?
What are you up to?
I was just reading. What are you doing?
Just sitting up watching the telly.
Oh, yeah? You alright?
Yeah.
You alright, boss?
Yeah, alright, just had me dinner.
What have we got?
Oh, Stanley had a fire.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, bit too much actually. Don't mind. What are you up to?
I was just reading, bro.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
You alright,
Yeah, I'm alright, Dad. Yeah, I've got to get on my study, and I.
Yeah,
I'm alright, bro. I've only got another half hour. I'll ring you back once I finish if you want.
Yeah, alright, mate. Alright.
I've got half hour to go, and I'll ring you back.
Yeah, alright.
Alright, boss.
I'll ring you on.
Alright, I'll chat in a minute. I'll chat with you in a bit, yeah? Alright, bro. Speak in a bit. Bye then. Sorry about that, everyone. I apologise. Father ringing. And partial displacement of 1,220 more families in the land acquisition for the refinery carried out by the government. has been strongly opposed by the local people. The resistance was supported by local organisations. However, people were still forcibly removed from their houses before they were bulldozed. The freshly bulldozed site was backgrounded by the Brodin Nyamgiri. Repeatedly, people talked about the mountain as if it were a close friend or a family member, a local and beloved perpetual presence. Biswajit Mohanty and a Bhubaneswar based conservationist had already filed a complaint against a Alumina refinery and the proposed mining with the Central Empowered Committee, the CEC. I didn't know what that was, conservationist. Never come across that word before. On the grounds of violations of forest and environmental laws, Mr. Whitwick, the Duati, a young environmental lawyer based in Delhi, was involved in the forest rights movement from Porphyria Sammantra, a Ghanaian environmentalist, used the analysis of the environmental impact assessment reports for the alumina refinery and mining project to draft a petition that was submitted to the CEC. The author, Kundan Kumar, prepared a brief report on the ecological and the biodiversity importance of Nyamgiri. The report was released both through the email networks and on the website called www.epgorissa.org, managed by the activists based in Bhubaneswar. These studies and the report documented the environmental and controversial importance of Nyamgiri. The individuals and their activities eventually influenced the CEC's decisions, and a recommendation was made to the Supreme Court of India that the mining of the Nyamgiri should not be allowed in view of the rich biodiversity. It also noted that the environmental clearance to the refinery was based on wrong information and recommended withdrawal of this clearance. There was a celebration amongst the local people and the activists as the Supreme Court. SC generally tend to accept the recommendations of the CEC. However, additional reports commissioned by the Ministry of Environmental and Forest (MOEF) Government of India said that mining could be taken up with certain safeguards. Two expert groups constituted by the MOEF subsequently visited the site and were provided with information by both the company and activist groups. These expert groups wrote scathing reports criticising Vedanta as well as the government of Odisha for having ignored the settlement of under the FRA based on these reports in 2010. The MOEF cancelled the forest clearance and refused to allow mining in Nyamgiri. The decision was challenged in the Supreme Court by Vedanta, and in April 2013 the Supreme Court, in a landmark judgment, said that the Gram Sabas village assemblies around Nyamgiri need to decide whether the proposed mining violates religious and other forest rights, and that the same must be considered by the government for the forest clearance for mining. At the same time of submission of this paper, the preparation for the Grand Sabha meetings is ongoing. Activity 1. Have a read. The case study about the Dogri Con. And think about the following question. Why is the Vedanta and the mining corporation able to start mining on the land that had spiritual importance to the Dongiri Kondeh? How did the civil protest emerge to claim ancestral land rights, and who was involved in this protest? What factors empowered the Dongiri to put a fight against a powerful mining corporation? Nyamgiri is topped up by rich bauxite deposits. the extraction of which was sought by the London-based Vedanta Resources plc, a mining and metals multinational corporation. Kumar in 2013. Vedanta started mining the sacred mountain without consent from the Dongeria County because this land was assumed to belong to no one. The mountain clearly did have virtual importance to the Dongeria County. Repeatedly people talked about the mountain as if it were a close friend of a family member, a local and beloved perpetual presence. Page 152. The indigenous lands and territories, mapping the commons. Kumar 2013, page 199. However, the spiritual importance of the mountain to the Dongeri Kundi was obvious to the outsiders because the spiritual practices of the people did not require drawing boundaries around land. In response to the Vedanta's mining operation, the Dongeri Kundi put up a fight. People were wailing and begging, holding on to their doors, and were forcibly dragged out by the goons hired by the company. Kumar 2013. The indigenous group was able to gather support from NGOs and civil society, raising the profile of this issue in the media and taking it to the national and even international stage. Through our NGO contacts, we came to learn that Biswajit Mohanty, a Buransoir-based conservationist, had already filed a complaint against alumina refinery and proposed mining with the Central Empowered Committee, CEC, of the Supreme Court, on the grounds of violations of the forest and environmental laws. Two expert groups constituted by the MOEF subsequently visited the site and were provided with information by both the company and the activist groups. These expert groups wrote scathing reports criticising Vedanta, as well as the government of Odisha, for having ignored the settlement of the rights under the FRA Kumar 2013. As this was becoming a high-profile case, the Supreme Court had to take notice as its final verdict was in favour of the Dongeri Kundi. The connections of the NGOs and civil society organisations finally helped in the Dongeri Kundi in the struggle. In April 2013, the Supreme Court, in a landmark judgment, said that Gram Sabhas, village assemblies around the Nyam need to decide whether the proposed mining violates religious and other forest rights, and at the same must be considered by the government for forest clearance for mining. It's basically what we're what we're talking about. People, it's also like we're talking about mapping home as well, isn't it? People go to a place of rest to pray, for instance. Then all of a sudden, you got building regulations trying to build some properties, to make population growth accountable for, taking up, something that's been there, derelict, and they got a place in Egypt and stuff like that, haven't you? You got a place in Egypt where people go, like, probably stuff like Cleopatra, all them kind of things, Tutankhamun, all that kind of stuff, all derelict places. They're sacred. You can't build upon. They're sacred to a lot of people, a lot of remembrance. You can't take these places away from people. 1.2. The imbalance of power. The Nyam struggle depicts a remarkable story of the indigenous group's success in claiming back land that it nearly lost to resource extraction by multinational mining corporations. That is also a complex story that involves a chain of events that led to Indian Supreme Court's decision not to allow mining to go ahead. Kumar in 2013 provides a detailed timeline of major events related to the Nyamgiri struggle during 1997-2013. Box 5.5, a timeline of the Nyamgiri struggle. 1997. A memorandum of understanding signed for a mining and alumini refinery project between the government and Addisi and Sterilites, later a subsidiary of the Vedanta plc. 2002. Land acquisition notice to 12 villages in the Langar area. 2003. Land acquisition notice to the 12 villages in the Langari area. 2003 land acquisition initiated in the Langari area, leading to local protest and mobilisation. 2004 rally against Vedanta, attended by the affected people. Dongria Kondis and the socialist leader of Kishan Patanak and the Gandhian Pufoli Samantra. The petition filed against the Vedanta plc on environment and forest law violation in front of the Central Empowered Committee, CEC Supreme Court. 2003 recommends that mining of the Nyamgiri should not be allowed. The Vedanta ravages through India reported release Pgaes brief report of ecological and biodiversity importance of Nyamgiri issues. Dongeri, the Khans, come to Bhubaneswar to protest against proposed Nyamgiri mining. 2007, the Norway Pension Fund invests in Vedanta. On the basis of the recommendations of the Council of the Ethics, Norway, in the view of the poor environmental and human rights record of the Vedanta. CEC issues another report, which recommends that mining in Nyamgiri should not be allowed. The environmental clearance for the aluminium refinery should be cancelled. 2008 protests outside Vedanta's annual general body meeting in London, UK. Supreme Court ignores CEC recommendations and allows MOEF to give clearance for mining in Nyamgiri. MOEF gives clearance in principle for diversion of forest land for mining in Nyamgiri with a number of conditions. Bear with me a sec, then, gents. We're going to get through this book together. Survival. International names. Vedanta as one of the worst. 3 companies violated indigenous rights. Road blockages by local movement to stop mining equipment from reaching Nyamgiri hilltop. Rahul Gandhi visits Nyamgiri and assures Dongeri Khans and his support for their legal fight to protect Nyamgiri. 2009, MOEF gives environmental clearance for mining and Nyamgiri, contingent of final forestry clearance, protest in front of Vedanta, refinery in Nangarth. Human chain of more than 10,000 people around Nyamgiri to protest against proposed mining. On recommendation of Forest Advisory Council, the MOEF constitutes a Ramantham committee to examine whether the provisions of the Forest Rights Act have been followed before giving final clearance for the Nyamgiri forest diversion. UK National Contact Point, UK NCP, for the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises indicts Vedanta for the rights and freedoms of Dongeri Khans. 2010, MOEF Saxena Committee writes a scathing report to citing violations of the FRA and other forests and environmental laws by the Vedanta and the state government. MOEF declines to give final forest clearance for mining Nyamgiri. 2011 writ petition filed by Odissi Mining Corporation in the Supreme Court to overturn the MOEF decision. 2013 Supreme Court, based in their interpretation of the Forest Rights Act 2006 and the Pan-Siata large extension to the Scheduled Areas Act 1996, rules that the Gram Sarbas village councils it shall have a say whether mining should take place or not, and that the MOEF will take its final decision based in the Gram Sarbas recommendations. This case study raised a number of issues about imbalances in the political power. Before you go on about them in depth, consider the following questions. Page 155. How does the political power of the multinational corporations impact on indigenous stakeholders who are less powerful? How might these powerful imbalances be mitigated? How do indigenous communities mobilise support to put up a fight against multinational corporations? How might character mapping assist the communities to assert their land rights? Much like the colonists in the 18th to 19th centuries, the Vedanta, the multinational corporation, assumed that the land in plan to mine for aluminum or was terra nullius, but the land was in fact inhabited by the indigenous group in everyday life in the Western world. It is assumed to the individuals that have some right to decide what happens to their own land. There may sometimes be compulsory purchase of a land for road construction, for example, but in such circumstances, the landowner is compensated. Bearing such exceptional circumstances, however, people can in general exercise the right to decide how to use their own plot of land as long as they have obtained planning permission from the authorities. Once this permission is in place, it is normally guaranteed that individuals' rights will not be contravened by the state and their land will not be trespassed upon by someone else. The right to decide what happens to an individual's land, even through constrained by certain rules and regulations, is partly because the legal system can protest property rights. By recognising land boundaries, being able to decide what happens to their land is also a matter of people's rights, and those rights are strengthened by the legal system in place. The indigenous lands, on the other hand, often suffer from loosely defined boundaries and from the lack of named ownership. They often become vulnerable to exploitation. The customary use of land often remain unrecognised in the legal system, meaning that they do not afford the legal protection to the extent that private property does. In order to understand customary use of the outsiders, you need to understand how local people use their land and private or public ownership. The Vedanta should have sought is described as free. Prior and informed consent, the FPIC, from the Dongira Code and the key stakeholders and the guardians of the land in question before conducting any resource extraction from the Nine-Giri Mountain. This is in accordance with the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the UNDRIP. Article 10, which states indigenous. Page 156. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for following me. Happy New Year's Eve. People shall not forcibly remove their lands or territories. No relocation shall take place without free, prior and informed consent of the indigenous peoples concerned and after agreement on just and fair compensation and, where possible, with the option of return. United Nations, 2008. FPIC, in the principle that indigenous group has the right to give or withhold in consent to proposed projects, as that may affect the land it customarily owns, occupies and otherwise uses. Free and prior informed consent. FPIC. FPIC implies informed, non-coercive negotiation between investors, companies and governments and indigenous peoples prior to the development of establishment of oil palm estates, timber plantations or other enterprises on their customary lands. This principle means that those who wish to use the customary lands belonging to the indigenous communities must enter into negotiations with them. It is the communities who have the right to decide whether they will agree to protect or not once they have the full and accurate understanding of the implications of the project on them and their customary land. And most commonly interpreted, the right to the FPIC is meant to allow for indigenous peoples to reach consensus and make decisions according to their customary system of decision making. So the fight of the FPIC is necessary to ensure a level playing field between communities and government or companies, and where as a result, a negotiated agreement provides companies with greater security and less risky investments. FPIC also implies careful and participatory impact assessment, project design and benefit sharing agreement. FPIC has been widely accepted in the corporate social responsibility policies of private companies. Working in sectors such as dam building, extractive industries, forestry, plantations, conservation, bioprospecting and environmental impact assessment. Just going to have a quick breather. We've only got 9 minutes left. Thank you so much. Anyway, page 157. Thank you so much for staying tuned. Activity 2. And that's what we went to go through. Indigenous. As an indigenous come up quite frequent, wasn't it? The word indigenous. Where did it come up? I mean, I don't know everything. I know a bit, quite a fair bit. I don't know everything. So you listen to me. I talk a good game of politics. I don't know everything. I think you'll find a lot of these. You know yourself. A lot of politicians don't know everything. We're learning something new every day. I have to look up some of the stuff I read, some of the stuff I write. I think in my head, does this word make sense? What I'm trying to make? I'm trying to make a story, a really in-depth, intelligent story. I put some really, fundamentally well in advanced words down. I have to make sure they're inaccurate with my story. Same as all these. You want to be an author. You want to be a great author yourself. There's so many avenues you can go down to be an author. I'll tell you one of them. No, I won't. Yes, I think Amazon do a free book if you want to become an author or narrator of your own story, your own biography. Maybe you've got a biography you want to come out with, or narrate children's stories. That's the way to go. So if you want to become an author, indigenous anyway. I'm guessing indigenous. Talking about indigenous, it's like, but in this context, world indigenous refers to a notion of place-based human ethnic culture that has not migrated from its homeland, and is not assessed as a colonial population to be indigenous, and therefore the definition from being a world culture. So I'm guessing where it come up. Yeah. So when you're talking about land, taking over land, the indigenous people learned about the building, or the building not going in place. Maybe they're concerned there's not enough population growth for them to be saved. Something along them lines. Or they're not getting treated with the National Bill of Rights. Inequalities representation. We put it nicely, because equalities is very, very important in everyone's day-to-day life. Treat everyone even. Anyway, activity 2. Counter mapping indigenous islands. FPIC is a great principle in theory, but what are some of the obstacles to it? Having read the description of the FPIC above, list the obstacles that come to mind. Consider who might seek FPIC from the indigenous group in the question and who might represent this group. Comments. FPP 2014 identifies the following factors as some of the obstacles to FPIC. On a practical level of carrying out the FPIC, it can be problematic. Identifying who should certify the right to the FPIC has been respected and how this should be done. Another challenge for indigenous peoples in their efforts to exercise their right to FPIC is to ensure that their system of decision making are genuinely representative and made in ways that are inclusive of and accountable of members of their communities. So this where it's not we're not going to call it a rational racial attack. We're going to call it supported within equalities. I don't like people find the words it's racism. I'm not getting housed because of racism. We're not getting housed because they're not treating equalities fairly. That's how I like to put it. Because people just find that word around willy-nilly. It happens a lot in today's society. I do a lot of stereo and cast boxing, and it's thrown around too much. I've got all different ethnicities in my family, and my beliefs and equalities, it's just as much as anybody else. But I don't use that word racist. I don't use that word, the M word that people keep saying. I've been bullied through the M word. Don't use it. It's not a nice word to use. I don't like the sound of it. So we're talking equalities. When you're talking in a racial sense, to say I'm not treated fairly, I'm not treated with equalities, it breaks down the person who's trying to exemplify the fact that you're a different minority. Say, I want to be treated fairly. The International Bill of Rights gives me my equalities. It gives me the same human being as everyone. We breathe the same air. We, share the same blood. I'm a human. Treat me as a human. That's how you should break it down. That will abolish all this rational abortion that goes over social media and stereo. I believe. Maybe wrong, but you can air and do as you please. But that's my phrase and that's my opinion. How I like to express the stress of it. I don't like, I don't know what culture you want to put, what category you want to put me in, but my mum is half West Indian, so I've got a great case to stand, so I don't like it. I don't like people being racist, so there you go. Anyway, despite these options insisting on their right to FPIC, forest peoples have been able to block plantations and dams planned for their lands and have been able to negotiate fairer deals with palm oil developers, loggers and local government land use planners. FPIC is now a key principle in international law jurisprudence related to indigenous peoples. It is a way of addressing the power and mitigating the exploitation of the powerless by the powerful. A lack of consultation with the indigenous group meant that the mining activity of the Niagara Mountain went ahead without consent from the Dongria Lukundi. This led to the group to resist the mining activity, which was subsequently deemed illegal by the Supreme Court of India. In other situations, the indigenous groups would perhaps have agreed to mining if the mining operation provided destroying a sacred site. In either case, international law recognises indigenous people's right to self-determination, a fundamental principle of human rights law that is recognised by the United Nations Charter. It refers to an individual and a collective right to freely determine political status and to freely pursue economic, social and cultural development. Guide to Action 2014. This recognition gives the indigenous people the right to decide whether or not to condemn the mining activity or to condone it. It also gives them the right to demand that the material benefits of such activity to share with them. I'm on page 158. So if you guys are on the same module as me, you listen in on Castbox. Got 17 listeners on there, which is great, and 2 listeners on YouTube. Thank you so much. Page 158. Indigenous groups resistance. So, you know, politics, when you come to talk about politics, indigenous people, indigenous groups, it could be, you know, like you talk about England, you've got Catholic, you've got Christians, you've got the groups that are not wanting to, I don't know, pursue a building regulation, building rights or something, or industrialisation in their community. And I don't know about me. Anyway, what could Dongria County have done to safeguard their sacred mountain before Vedanta came on the scene? From Vedanta's point of view, the official version on the map of Nyingri Mountain in 2002 perhaps did suggest that the mountain was sacred. This is what I was talking about just previously, talking about like listed buildings. Listed buildings. You can't build on, you know, you want to put some new houses up for the communities. You can't go and knock down derelict buildings, derelict trees as well. You can't just go and build on derelict islands or derelict land. Derelict forests. It's important, you know, it's all politics through site agents, other ministers. It's all going through the, you know, not going for the Commons, so to speak. It goes for the council, and then the council probably goes for the Commons as a great big discussion. This omission of the cultural importance of the mountain from the official map meant that Dongria County had to go to a great lengths to win back the claim over the mountain. Imagine if counter-mapping for Luso 1995 had been carried out by prior 2002. Such an exercise would have challenged an official version of the map by representing invisible cultural tradition. Counter-mapping commons such as a sacred mountain on the Dongria County is challenging for two reasons. The boundaries of such sacred sites are often fuzzy, unlike well-defined boundaries of a privately owned property. The boundaries of the commons evolve over time through convention, rituals and practices associated with these sites. The sacred attributes of such sites often relate to very individual or personal experiences of the indigenous peoples. The spiritual practices that take place are often secretive and are intended to be practiced without the knowledge of outsiders, making it very difficult to represent them on a controversial map. To address these challenges, conventional maps are non-sufficient, but new and emerging technologies in digital cartography hold promise. These technologies can facilitate the users to work beyond the two dimensions of a paper map and can also enable a mashup of various media and the map simultaneously. Advantages of participatory mapping offer opportunities for working in indigenous communities in collaborative ways. At the heart of these mapping methodologies is the spirit of a collaboration between researchers and the indigenous communities, where their communities are seen as co-researchers. The digital cartographic technology and a participatory mapping together can help to address the challenges of mapping indigenous people's sacred sites. Such combinations of methods can help to recognise that indigenous sacred. Last page I'm on. I'll stop at this page. Recognise that indigenous sacred sites are more than important or shapes on the map. They are representations of indigenous cultural heritage, rituals, performance offerings, folklores, narratives, stories and myths. The technology of innovations, particularly the rise of easy-to-use online mapping tools to exploit location-based data, means that anyone can now map. The increasing accessibility of the mapping tools may be a way forward to address challenges of mapping sacred sites. Robert Kitchen and Martin Dodge, 2007, was highlighted the analytical potential of digital mapping to represent qualitative information, such as stories and myths that accompany indigenous lands. This form of digital mapping can provide powerful tools for the indigenous people to show information about their land which is not obvious from a two-dimensional map. However, there is often mismatch between indigenous knowledge systems and Western digital technologies. Margaret Wickens Pierce and Rini Pellini Lewis 2007, two geographers who also have their roots in Native American communities, argue the challenge for indigenous peoples across the world. Across the world is to find a way of incorporating digital technologies in their mapping efforts without mistranslating the rich qualitative information that goes hand in hand with the maps. Overcoming this mismatch requires close collaboration between the researchers and the indigenous peoples who are most engaged with their ancestral land and have intimate knowledge of it. Not just the mapping of indigenous lands that can benefit from these digital technologies. Everyday maps aimed at the motorists of the water, for example, also suffer from omissions because they cannot represent the user's engagement with the space in a two-dimensional form. Also, official maps, such as the British Ordnance Survey maps, have restrictions. For example, the Ordnance Survey website says Ordnance Survey paper mapping is protected by Crown copyright. We have delegated authority from the controller of Her Majesty's Stationery Office to decide terms and conditions. Are also required to use digital versions of the Ordnance Survey maps. Happy New Year, Paul Angel. Thank you for coming through, buddy. Always here, being loyal, listening. Appreciate you coming through, buddy. Just at the end of this page, I just want to say Happy New Year. I'm so thankful that I made it through. Times of last year been hard for us all, isn't it? COVID. We all got different troubles in life, haven't we? Granddad, nan, cat, dog, losing something or other. I mean, I've lost my children. Parents are getting old as well. We've got worrying times ahead for them with COVID, people catching COVID, especially with this COVID going on. Very, very frightening for a lot of us. People as young as 32 or even younger. I know someone that's 32 that's just recently passed away from COVID. So children, I'm pretty sure children have passed away to COVID as well. So we're lucky to be here, and I'm thankful we're all here today listening. That's all I can say. I really am thankful. Also, I pulled myself through in we've got to be in lockdown. We've got to be in lockdown. Exactly when we're going on people's support bubbles. No, not putting not worrying about catching COVID off them. It's about you giving COVID to them. That's what you got to think about. That's how you got to look at it. I know to myself, I'm in my own bubble. The only way I can get COVID if my immune system gets really weak, and I go to the supermarket once a week. That's about it. So chance of me getting COVID are quite low, but at the same time, I'm a bumble because I ain't father. If anyone knows what it's like to not have their children by their side. Oh, nice one, Tony, buddy. Yeah, I thought it was you, Tony. I thought it was you. If anyone knows what it's like to not have their children, not be able to speak to them in the morning before they go to school, not be able to speak to them when they get home, making sure they're not being bullied, making sure their health is looking after their health, making sure they can stick up for themselves, making sure they can get through life okay. I've always looked after my kids' nutrition, their health, trying to make them better, give them a better chance at life, But not having to do that, it's quite hard. But we're all going through problems in life, we get through it. There's always someone worse off than you. That's how you look at it. That's how you get through every day. Through compassion as well. You have compassion. Your parents, your others around you. There's compassion that gives you the drive to get up in the morning. What drives you to go to sleep? It's because you've been up too much in the morning. You've been up all day. I do like my bed though, I must admit. But I hate the cold when you get into bed, it's freezing. To address these issues in 2004, British interpreter Steve Coast came up with the idea of OpenStreetMap. He was inspired by the success of media and applied the principles of free, online, user-generated content to everyday street maps at the time of writing. The OpenStreetMap community has grown to over 2 million registered users who can collect data using GPS services, aerial photography, and other free sources, and update OpenStreetMap to features that are missing from places they are familiar with. I mean, you've got a GPS system on your mobile phones. You can map. People can map where you go. I mean, you've got the Google Earth on your phone. Everywhere you go on your phone, it maps where you go. It maps what distance you've been, where you travel. So, you know, we're pretty safe. Unless you've got a criminology mind, you're trying to hide the truth. I've never got anything to hide. Wherever I go, my phone's with me. Got nothing to hide. But anyway, ladies and gents, thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. That's my reading for today. I'm going to say to eat. So, 7 o'clock at night, I ain't eating. That's crazy. I need to eat. Have a wonderful new year. Hopefully you guys got new aspirations. I think a lot of us have new aspirations for 2021. Coming out, hopefully getting some sort of work. I want to get into office. That's my main priority. Absolutely. Getting some sort of office environment so I can work. Either part-time or year-round, or I just want a job that I can do and look after my household. I'd like to do this actually. It's quite a big client, yeah. And get paid for it. I think I'll bring in quite a good audience. I can't see why not. I'll bring more of an audience in here than sitting and advice doing it in a day. I've got 20 listeners. Look at my phone. I don't think you can. You can't see my phone. You can't see my phone. But yeah, I've got Castbox on. I've got my YouTube on. Sometimes I have my Facebook on, but I'm not on there today. Anyway, I just want to say thank you. God bless. Have a wonderful week. Be prosperous, while prosperity matters. Inspire. Do not expire. One love. Speak soon. Happy New Year.